So this talk is on my first love, which is Android development, and this is for bringing your existing Android app to the big screen with Android TV. So let me talk to you before I jump in for a second, and this is for folks that are mostly new to the platform. So I'll give a quick intro, then I'll talk about basically the key steps in development, and then I'll talk about some design principles. So before I jump in, let me tell you guys and girls why I like Android TV so much. So I am in no way a front-end developer. So I don't do UI, and I don't do UX. So for me, thinking about how can I write a really great app for the big screen that's supposed to have this like great UI with like smooth transitions and animations, right? That like people are going to look at in groups and comment on. So for me, I'm like, holy crap, I'm out. I can't do that. But I fell in love with Android TV because this is actually one of the few platforms where I can write a really top-notch cinematic UI. And I can do that because Android TV, the developer experience, is all about providing tools, which makes it super easy to do that. So that's why I like Android TV, and I'll show you like a quick preview of how that works. All right, so when most of us think about software on the television, we think about games. We just saw a great talk on CAS games, and after I finish, we'll see a great talk on Android TV games. If you have an existing game for Android, it's super easy to port it to the TV because the TLDR of this entire talk is that Android TV is just Android on a new form factor. So if you've got a game, and there's of course more to it than that, but that's the TLDR. So if you've got a game, you're in good shape. But what I really care about is apps. So just as is true for games, if you have an existing Android app, the TLDR is you're also really, really close to getting it working on the big screen. So this is actually Santa Tracker, which is super fun, and this year it was ported to Android TV. So I absolutely love just bringing stuff to the big screen. Something to think about, I'll primarily talk about media apps in this talk, and that's really where the developer tools hit home. But you're not limited to just building music and video apps for the television. You should really think outside of the box, like what can you do in terms of sports or cooking or anything that can take advantage of the new form factor. I think we're actually, going back to this morning, I think we're actually at a really special time in the living room, and actually as software engineers and developers and computer scientists in general. And that's because the developer tools today are ridiculously good. So back when I started as a little kid, like what? I don't want to tell you how many years ago, but many years ago, writing like Quick Basic on an Apple, right? Like an Apple II, to think about like, oh man, I'm gonna sit down and like, I don't know, like a couple days later I'm gonna have like a great cinematic big screen app running on my TV would have been impossible. That would have been like a 15-year coding project, and today we can do it just trivially. So opportunity is the key word today. And yeah, the TLDR is, and like no BS here, if you are an Android developer, it's so easy to get it on the TV. And I actually am very cautious when I say the word easy. I hear a lot of talks where like, yeah, like it's super easy to do this. Like, trust me, use this developer platform, but it is actually pretty easy to do. All right, so what's the same and what's different when you're going from a mobile app to Android TV? Starting with what's the same, almost all of your code. Pretty much the main thing to do is you need to roll a new UI, a new UX, and the Leanback library in particular, and the other developer tools makes that ridiculously easy. Leanback is the heart of Android TV. It's basically a collection of pre-built fragments, which we'll get into in a sec. So when folks have a TV app, what they really need to do is typically if you look at a media app, there's a really common flow. You turn on the TV and you need to find content to watch. There's typically two ways you can do that. One is you might want to browse for it. And Leanback provides a great pre-built fragment with smooth animations and transitions to help you browse for content. The other way to find content is you might want to search for it. And Leanback also provides a search fragment with built-in voice recognition to make it super easy to take the user to their content in the minimum number of steps. After you find content, you might want to see details on it or take an action like renting a movie, and then you want to play it back. And pretty much all of the UI components you need for this is included out of the box. And we actually have a sample app with all this working immediately. And what I'll do in this talk is look at the key chunks of code you need to really get these fragments wired up and populated with your content. The other thing that's the same about Android TV is you can actually add support for it in your existing APK. In the same way you would do with Android Wear, which is fantastic because it means that your Play Store experience is basically identical. You get to use all the familiar distribution and monetization tools. Super easy. Right, Play Store. I have like one or two reasons why. A question that comes up often is, why should you develop for Android TV? And what I would do is, like, as a developer, it's where do you want to spend your time? So it's sort of like a risk-reward trade-off. The developer risk is fairly low, and I just want to show you what some of the rewards are. Android TV is a great way to get your content discovered and engaged. Discovered means that people need to find it. So this is the Android TV home screen. And the feature that I want to point you to is the central feature is the recommendations row. And what I love about this is if you're developing a media app, you can actually publish recommendations front and center on the Android TV home screen, which means when folks turn this thing on, they're going to see recommendations from your app. And that's just a phenomenal way to get your content out there. Another obvious way to get your content discovered is search. The other central feature of the Android TV home screen is search. And you can actually integrate with search. So if I search for my favorite TV show on the home screen, I can actually see results from your app. Another reason is that when it comes to retaining users, when folks are watching content, screen size is a huge variable. So there's been different internal studies on YouTube, and this is across all devices, not just TV, so this also includes Cast. But typically, if you can imagine that a user watches 1 hour of video content, say on their cell phone or tablet, that same user might be watching in the range of 3 hours on TV. So that's a lot of time that you can compete for by developing for Android TV. And really the opportunity is, when I get home, like I've had a long day, I've been coding, I'm exhausted. I spend a lot of time relaxing, and I think a lot of us do, in front of our TV screen. It's a lot of time that I'm just sitting there. Often, like I have a smart TV with Android TV, and I have some old stuff, using kind of these not so great UIs, just browsing around for content. And I think because the developer tools are so strong, like you as developers, as we as developers, really do have an opportunity to see if we can, I don't think we've done it yet, but to really come up with what's the killer apps, like what's the next generation of killer apps that people can use in that 3+ hours. I think it's actually up to 4 now in the US, that we're just sitting there on the couch. And so this is a huge opportunity. For folks brand new to the platform, the engagement model is a little bit different. It's a D-pad remote control usually, also a game controller optionally. There's no menu button, no pointer. Mostly we're navigating systems of cards. Everything should be simple and quick. And all the elements on your UI need to be focusable. So what I want to do is quickly look at the 3 major steps to getting your mobile app working on Android TV. And the first thing we're going to do is update your manifest. You don't need to read all this. I just wanted to drop some code on the screen. The basic idea here is you've got your main activity that launches on your mobile device. What you're going to do in your Android manifest is add a second activity. And this is the activity that's going to launch on the TV. This is simple stuff, but it's really quick and easy. To specify the TV activity, you would use the Leanback launcher intent filter. So now we've got an activity that will launch on the TV. Another thing you need to do is declare that you support Leanback. And Leanback is the UI used by Android TV. What's interesting here is I've got required false, and the reason I'm not requiring it is we're interested in developing apps that can run on multiple different Android form factors. So with required false, you can also run on a mobile device. Required true, the Play Store is going to say, oh, Android TV only. Just with those 2 steps, you can get your app to appear in the apps row on the home screen. Another difference with Android TV is on a mobile device, you've got an icon. On Android TV, you need a banner, which is basically just a bigger icon. You can also specify that in your manifest. Something to think about if you're porting an app from a mobile device is hardware differences. So one cool thing about mobile that I think we often take for granted is just the insane number of sensors on a cell phone. Like, folks are often complaining, and I complain as well, like, oh, the battery life stinks on my phone. But when you think about how much hardware is packed on there, it's actually astounding that it works as well as it does. So phones have gyroscopes, accelerometers, all this jazz, GPS, touchscreens. So when you're porting an app to also work on Android TV, you need to update your manifest to specify that none of this stuff is required. That way it can be installed on both devices. Then what you want to do is at runtime, before you try and use a hardware feature, so if you're accustomed to using the GPS, just update your application code to check whether that hardware exists on the device before you try and use it. Something to avoid is it's also possible to check what form factor you're running on. So with the UI Mode Manager, I can say, hey, am I running on a TV or a phone? And then access hardware based on that. The issue with doing this is, so this will work out of the box right now. You can say, like, if I'm on a TV, I'm not going to access GPS or a touch screen or any stuff like that. But I'd recommend actually, instead of using this approach, just check for specific pieces of hardware before you try and access them, and that way you'll help future-proof your app. So if TVs down the road have features we don't expect them to now, you won't have to change your code at all. Other gotchas is permissions. So permissions can cause implicit hardware requirements. So if you have a camera permission in your mobile app and you port it to the TV, that actually creates a permission on the camera. So you need to watch out for stuff like that, otherwise you won't be listed as compatible in the Play Store. So step one is basically updating your manifest. And that's mostly bookkeeping. It's mostly bookkeeping code. There's nothing to this, right? And then it's just updating your app code to check for hardware. That's super easy. What was personally really hard for me before Android TV was how on earth am I going to create a UI, right? That's what we care about. How can I create a good UI? And the answer is you use the Leanback library. Let's take a quick look. So the Leanback library, the main feature is it comes with a bunch of pre-built fragments. This is a static picture. I really should have a video here because the cool thing is to see this in action because the animations are really slick. So this is typically the entry point for your big screen app, if you have a media app. And this is called the browse fragment. On the left, we have a list of categories, and you can think of these like movies. They might be action movies, comedies, dramas. And on the right, we've got a list of content, rows of content that belong in those categories. Another really common fragment is the details fragment. After you select a movie, I'd like to view details of it. And the cool thing, the details fragment also comes with these little actions. The great thing about these is they're all super easy to navigate with a D-pad. It just takes 1 or 2 clicks and you just sail right through it. And then, of course, when you found content that you want to watch, you can play it back with the playback overview fragment, or overlay fragment, I believe. So these are all totally pre-built. So working with Leanback, if you just want, and they're, first of all, they're totally customizable. So the way they look now, this is just straight out of the sample app. If you open up Android Studio and pull the Leanback sample, this is straight out of the sample. They're totally customizable in terms of colors and branding and all of that. You can also pull pieces out of them and roll your own fragments from scratch. And if you're building for Android TV, these are also 100% optional. So Leanback makes it super easy to build a really great UI, but you're like totally not required to use it, and you can do your own thing if you like. So here are the main steps to using Leanback. So here is an empty browse fragment. So when we updated our manifest in the first step, we declared an activity to run on the TV. If in that activity we just specify a layout that points to, let's say we extend the browse fragment, we point to that in our layout, we can bring it up. And when we bring it up, it's totally empty. So our job really is, let's say we have a mobile app with a bunch of videos. Our job is to populate this with content. So here's how it looks under the hood. So a layout that you don't see because it's empty is basically it's a list of rows. Each row has the columns for the, say, like action movies, comedies, dramas. These actually really are, they sort of stick to a row. So this whole thing, category 2 in the row is a row, and category 1 in the row is a row. But Leanback, just this browse fragment, has a list of these rows. And our goal is to map our content onto the fragment. And to do that, we use a design pattern. If y'all are familiar with model controller view or model view controller, this is model view presenter, and it's a variant of it. So the model is your standard model. These are objects from your database. Say these are movies. When you're moving to Leanback, if you have an existing model, you don't need to make any changes to it at all. So no changes to your data structure. Views are standard Android views, image views and text views. So there's nothing new there. And we have one new concept, which is a presenter. And a presenter's job is to map from an object to a view. So if I have a movie in my database, I would use a presenter to create a view for it and then populate that view with the different fields from the movie. By using different presenters, you can display the same object from your model in different ways. So this is the same movie. Here's how it might look as a card on the browse fragment, And here's how it might look on the details fragment. Same movie, it's just a different presenter putting different fields in different places. There's really two key methods that you care about in a presenter. The first is onCreateViewHolder, which creates a view. Here we're looking at a card presenter, which creates an image card view, which is just composed of two standard Android views, a text view and an image view. The second method that we care about is onBindViewHolder, and that takes an object from the database and just populates the different fields on the view. So there's, in computer science, right, it's all about like abstraction, abstraction, abstraction. And so like, I'm introducing some like abstract concepts really quick, just because once we have these, we can wire them together to quickly populate a UI. So trust me, and you'll see where I'm going in a sec. The fragments introduce a concept called an array object adapter. And that's a fancy word. It's just an object, and it contains a presenter and a bunch of data. And behind the scenes, the fragment will use the presenter to lay out the data appropriately. So this is one of the list rows from the browse fragment, and the idea is that it has a card presenter. So to populate this with our content, all we really need to do is add our movies to the object adapter, give the object adapter our presenter, and then the adapter and the fragment behind the scenes will take care of laying it out. So using Leanback, really you need to write or use an existing presenter, and then just give it the data from your model. And the pattern's the same when we want to populate the rows on the browse fragment. We have a different object adapter. Instead of using a card presenter, this time we're using a list row presenter. And a list row presenter is built into Leanback, and it understands how to lay out a whole row on the browse fragment, right? Here's a screenshot of some code that you don't need to read. The best way to learn to use Leanback, so this is a screenshot directly out of the Leanback sample included with Android Studio. All of the code you see here is used to populate the browse fragment with movies from a database. So just this code, this is really the core code that will go from your database to a fully populated and like live browse fragment. And the best way to learn it is I would basically go into this method, Leanback sample, and honestly just start commenting out pieces. I would start by commenting out all the code and slowly putting it back in, and you'll just see the UI populate really rapidly. So it's a surprisingly small amount of code for a surprising amount of functionality, and that's why I like Leanback so much. All right. There's other pre-built fragments that you can use as well. So this is the guided step fragment. It's great for providing configuration options. Works really great with a D-pad. So basically we covered update your manifest, that's mostly handling hardware, adding new activity. It's updating your UI, that's mostly using pre-built fragments and populating them with content. And then the last step is really integrating with recommendations and search. One thing to keep in mind about recommendations is that a lot of apps might be publishing recs to the home screen. So one question is, how should these be laid out? The answer is behind the scenes, Android TV uses a recommendation engine, and it tries to prioritize recommendations that are useful. So it learns that over time based on what your users click on. So you want to avoid doing things like, of course, you want to avoid things like spamming it, and you want to really think about like, a great example of like a really solid recommendation is imagine a user is watching a TV show, and they've watched like the first 3 episodes of maybe Breaking Bad. A really awesome recommendation would be the next episode. And then when they click on that, what you don't want to do is take them into your app, into some sort of like window describing the show. You want to take them directly into the video. So the idea is that a good recommendation should go directly from the home screen into the content the user wants to watch. When you integrate with search, Leanback also includes a pre-built search fragment, which again you can customize, so you don't need to build a search UI. You don't need to worry about voice recognition. All you have to do is tie a content provider, which basically describes what's available in your database, into the search fragment. Then really quickly, that's it for development. And then really quick, I've got just 3 slides on design. And this is really like up to you. I think folks are still figuring out what's the optimal way to build an app for the living room. And we're still learning that. I am an engineer, not a designer, but the designers at Google have come up with 3 principles. And that's, the first one is to develop casual apps. The idea is that, as we've heard before, TV is super social. Your users are in the living room, they're trying to relax after work, and they're hanging out. They might be watching a movie, playing a game, but they're definitely not doing work. The second design principle, the designers who are much smarter than me in this area came up with, is simple. Voice recognition on Android TV works really well. It's powered by the same software that powers it on your phone, but if you think about, like, when I'm trying to use my phone on the street, there's a tremendous amount, and this is a machine learning problem, there's a tremendous amount of background noise, right? So voice recognition on the street is really challenging. In the living room, it's often much quieter, which means the accuracy of the voice recognition is often higher. So voice search is super powerful. There's two ways to input data on Android TV. One is text entry. Really don't want to do that unless it's something like a password. If it's anything more than a password, I would really look towards voice, especially for search. And then the last design principle is that we think that the UIs that you develop should be cinematic. And by cinematic, what that really means is it should fade away. So ideally, the thing the user cares about is the content. If that's a movie or if it's audio, content should take up the majority or the entirety of the screen, and the UI should just disappear. Another thing that I think is important is low learning curve. If you have a TV app, it should be intuitive and simple to use, right? All right, so to learn this stuff, by far your best resource, as always, is the docs. I would focus on getting the Leanback library up and running. If you like learning in video form, we've also got a Udacity class. The Udacity class is really targeted. If you're brand new to Android TV, the Udacity class is taught at that level, and it's a great way to go from 0 to a working Android TV app. And if you like learning through code, I would check out the Leanback sample on GitHub, which you can also pull through Android Studio. And I think with these three things together, it's pretty easy to learn how to do this. So yeah, thanks very much, and yeah.